A mother's frantic 911 call pierces through the night. Her 3-year-old daughter has vanished without a trace. But when investigators piece together her story, they discover something that will haunt them forever. Welcome back to Nightmare Echo. Tonight, we're taking you through 7 cases that shocked communities across America. Stories where nothing is what it seems, where the people we trust become the very ones we should fear. Each tale is more disturbing than the last. So settle in, let the rain wash away the noise of the world, and prepare yourself for the darkness that lurks in the hearts of ordinary people. But I have to ask you, are you ready to question everything you think you know about human nature? Story 1. June 10, 2024. A sweltering summer evening in Delaware. The phone rings at the Newcastle County Police Department. On the other end, a woman's voice trembles with what sounds like genuine terror. But sometimes, the most convincing performances come from the most unlikely actors. Darian Randall, 31 years old, tells police her world has just collapsed. Her 3-year-old daughter, Nola Dinkins, has been taken. According to Darian, she had pulled over on a quiet stretch of road when an armed man approached her vehicle. She describes the horror in vivid detail, how this stranger forced her out of the car, how little Nola screamed for her mommy, how helpless she felt watching her baby disappear into the night. The police spring into action immediately. An Amber Alert broadcasts across the state. Search teams mobilize. Volunteers scour neighborhoods. Everyone believes they're racing against time to save an innocent child. But what they don't know yet is that time has already run out. Detective Sarah Martinez has worked child abduction cases for 12 years. She's seen genuine grief, real terror, authentic desperation. But something about Darian's story feels rehearsed. The details are too perfect. Too clean. When parents lose their children, their stories are usually fragmented, emotional, inconsistent. Trauma affects memory. But Darian's account never wavers. Martinez begins to ask the hard questions. Why was Darian parked on that particular road? Why didn't she call 911 immediately? Why are there no witnesses to this supposed abduction? And then comes the question that changes everything, Mrs. Randall, when was the last time you actually saw Nola alive? For 48 hours, Darian maintains her story. She gives interviews to local news stations, pleading for her daughter's safe return. She posts on social media, begging for anyone with information to come forward. But investigators are building a different picture. They discover that Darian's boyfriend, a man with a violent criminal history, was present during the days leading up to Nola's disappearance. Security footage from nearby businesses shows no signs of the supposed abduction. No unknown vehicles. No suspicious activity. Just an empty road and a mother who seems to be alone. The truth begins to surface when police search Darian's phone records. The last person she called wasn't 911. It was her boyfriend. And that call was made hours before she reported her daughter missing. On June 12, just 2 days after the initial report, Darian's story finally crumbled. Under intense questioning, she breaks down and admits the unthinkable. There was no kidnapping. No armed stranger. No desperate struggle to save her child. Darian leads investigators to a vacant lot in Maryland. There, hidden beneath debris and scattered trash, they find the remains of 3-year-old Nola Dinkins. The autopsy reveals that this little girl, who should have been playing with toys and learning to write her name, had suffered unimaginable trauma before her death. Darian is charged with first-degree murder. Her boyfriend faces similar charges. The community that had rallied to find a missing child now grapples with the realization that the very person they were trying to help was the one responsible for the tragedy. Nola's father, who had been desperately searching for his daughter, now faces a different kind of nightmare. Not only has he lost his child, but he must come to terms with the fact that the woman he once loved was capable of such horror. The case raises disturbing questions about the nature of evil. How does a mother look into the eyes of her own child and choose violence? How does someone fabricate such an elaborate lie while their victim lies buried just miles away? But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this case is how convincing Darian's performance was. For 2 days, she fooled everyone, police, media, the public. She played the role of a grieving mother while knowing exactly where her daughter's body lay. This case reminds us that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the person sitting next to you, the neighbor who waves hello, the mother pushing a stroller in the park. And speaking of deception, our next story takes us into the digital age, where a simple swipe on a dating app led to a week of unimaginable terror. Story 2. In today's world, we swipe right to find love, scroll through profiles to find connection. But what happens when predators use these same platforms to find victims? 16-year-old Miranda Corset thought she was meeting someone for a casual encounter. Instead, she walked into a nightmare that would last 7 days. Miranda was like many teenagers, curious about the adult world, eager to explore, perhaps a bit naive about the dangers that lurk online. She had created a profile on Grindr, a dating app primarily used by gay and bisexual men. The app's location-based features made it easy for users to connect with people nearby. For Miranda, it seemed like a way to meet new people. For Stephen Gress, 37, it was a hunting ground. Gress contacted Miranda through the app. He was charming, friendly, and seemingly harmless. He told her he was looking for companionship, nothing threatening about his messages. What Miranda didn't know was that Gress had a history of violence. What she couldn't have imagined was that he lived with a girlfriend, Michelle Vega, 35, who would become just as involved in the horror to come. On the day they met, Miranda told friends she was going to see someone she'd connected with online. It was a decision that would cost her everything. Miranda arrived at Gress's St. Petersburg duplex expecting a brief meeting. Instead, she found herself in the company of both Gress and Vega. The couple told her they were interested in a 3-way arrangement. According to later police reports, Gress claimed he initially believed Miranda was 21 years old. But even when he learned she was only 16, he didn't send her home. He didn't call her parents. He didn't do what any reasonable adult would do. Miranda stayed the night. The next morning, she was allowed to leave, but something about the situation had changed. Maybe it was the way Gress looked at her. Maybe it was something Vega said. But Miranda made a decision that sealed her fate. She went back. The second time Miranda visited the duplex, the atmosphere was different. Gress and Vega were suspicious, paranoid. They accused Miranda of stealing a ring, a valuable piece of jewelry that had supposedly gone missing after her first visit. Miranda denied the theft. She insisted she hadn't taken anything. But her protests fell on deaf ears. What happened next transforms this story from a simple theft accusation into one of the most disturbing cases of torture and murder in recent memory. Instead of calling the police, instead of simply banning Miranda from their home, Gress and Vega decided to take justice into their own hands. They decided that Miranda would pay for her alleged crime. They decided she would never leave. What Miranda endured over the next week defies comprehension. According to court documents, she was beaten repeatedly, her body becoming so swollen and bruised that she was unrecognizable. The couple took turns torturing her. They used her as a target for their rage, their frustration, their twisted sense of justice. They held her captive in their home while her family wondered where she was. Miranda's phone went silent. Her social media accounts showed no activity. Her friends and family began to worry, but they had no idea where to look. Inside the duplex, Miranda's situation grew more desperate by the day. She was denied food, water, basic human dignity. The couple treated her not as a person, but as an object to be punished. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this case is how normal Gress and Vega appeared to the outside world. They went to work, ran errands, even went out to eat, all while keeping a 16-year-old girl captive in their home. On the 7th day, Miranda's torture came to an end. But not through rescue or escape. According to police reports, Gress and Vega used a billiard ball to suffocate her. They watched as life drained from her eyes, as her struggles grew weaker, as she took her final breath. And then, as if her murder was nothing more than an inconvenience, they went to Popeye's for dinner. Miranda's body was dismembered and thrown into a dumpster in Ruskin, Florida. The couple cleaned their duplex, disposed of the evidence, and went on with their lives as if nothing had happened. Miranda's family has filed a lawsuit against Grindr, claiming the app's lax age verification and location-based features contributed to her death. They're seeking $750,000 in damages. Stephen Gress and Michelle Vega have been charged with first-degree murder. But no amount of justice can bring back a 16-year-old girl who was just beginning to discover who she was. This case raises uncomfortable questions about digital safety, about the responsibility of tech companies, about how easily predators can use our own technology against us. But there's another question that haunts this case: how many other Miranda corsets are out there? How many other young people are one swipe away from danger? Our next story takes us from the digital world to a place where parents trust their most precious possessions, a daycare center where tragedy struck in the most unexpected way. Story 3. Every morning, millions of parents across the world face the same routine. They wake up their children, prepare breakfast, and then hand over their most precious possessions to strangers. We call it daycare. We trust these people with our children's lives. But what happens when that trust is shattered in the most devastating way possible? December 9, 2022. Fairy Tales Day Nursery in Dudley, England, begins another ordinary day. Parents drop off their children, kissing them goodbye and promising to return soon. Among those children is 14-month-old Noah Sabanda, a bright, curious toddler who had just begun walking. His parents, like so many others, trusted the nursery to keep their son safe. Kimberly Cookson, 22 years old, was one of the nursery workers responsible for the youngest children. She had been entrusted with the care of babies who couldn't yet speak for themselves, who relied entirely on adults for their survival. The nursery had all the proper certifications, the right policies, the expected procedures. On paper, everything looked perfect. But on this particular day, something went terribly wrong. The details of what happened to Noah Sabanda are still being investigated, but what we know is devastating. During what should have been a routine nap time, Noah stopped breathing. According to court documents, Cookson was responsible for putting the children down for their afternoon rest. This was a daily routine, something she had done countless times before. But on December 9, proper procedures weren't followed. The supervision that should have been in place was lacking. The safety measures that should have protected Noah failed him when he needed them most. Emergency services were called, but it was too late. Noah Sabanda, who had been perfectly healthy that morning, died at the nursery. His parents, who had kissed him goodbye just hours earlier, would never see their son alive again. The investigation into Noah's death revealed a pattern of negligence at Fairy Tales Day Nursery. Proper procedures for putting children down to sleep had not been followed. Staff supervision was inadequate. Kimberly Cookson, who was directly responsible for Noah's care, was found to have failed in her duty of care. The prosecution argued that her gross negligence directly contributed to the toddler's death. But this case raises deeper questions about the childcare system. How did these failures occur? Why weren't proper procedures in place? How many other children were at risk? The nursery's director, Deborah Latewood, was also charged in connection with Noah's death. The prosecution argued that the problems at Fairy Tales weren't just individual failures but systemic issues. On June 10, 2024, Kimberly Cookson stood before a judge and pleaded guilty to gross negligence manslaughter. In doing so, she accepted responsibility for the death of Noah Sabanda. The judge acknowledged her guilty plea, noting that it showed courage to accept responsibility for her actions. But no amount of courage can bring back a 14-month-old boy. Noah's parents, who had trusted this nursery with their son's life, now face an unimaginable reality. Their baby, who had just begun to explore the world, will never take another step, never say another word, never grow up to fulfill his potential. The case has sent shockwaves through the childcare community. Parents across the country are questioning whether their own children are safe, whether the people they trust with their most precious possessions are truly qualified to care for them. Noah Sabanda's death has led to calls for stricter oversight of childcare facilities, better training for staff, and more rigorous safety procedures. But for his family, these changes come too late. This case reminds us that even in places designed to protect children, tragedy can strike. It shows us that trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. The most heartbreaking aspect of this case is its preventability. Noah Sabanda died not because of a tragic accident or an unforeseeable emergency, but because of human negligence. Because the adults responsible for his care failed him. As Cookson awaits sentencing, Noah's family continues to grieve. They're left with memories of a bright, curious little boy who trusted the world around him, only to have that world fail him in the most devastating way. But sometimes, the people who claim to have children's best interests at heart can be the most dangerous of all. Our next story takes us into the world of religious extremism, where faith becomes a weapon. Story 4. Faith can move mountains, they say. It can provide comfort in dark times, hope in desperate moments. But what happens when faith becomes a substitute for action? When religious belief becomes a death sentence? Our next story takes us into a world where parents chose prayer over medicine, where faith healing took precedence over medical care, and where a newborn baby paid the ultimate price. The couple at the center of our story belonged to a religious community that viewed modern medicine with suspicion. They believed that God would provide healing through prayer and faith alone. This wasn't unusual in their community. They had seen other families rely on prayer during illness, had witnessed what they believed were miraculous recoveries, had been taught that true faith meant trusting in God rather than doctors. When the wife became pregnant, the couple was overjoyed. They saw this pregnancy as a blessing from God, a gift to be cherished and protected. They prayed for their unborn child, asked their community to pray with them, and prepared for what they expected to be a healthy birth. But they made one crucial decision that would ultimately cost their child's life. They decided to forego prenatal care, choosing instead to trust that God would ensure a safe delivery. When labor began, the couple again chose faith over medical intervention. They didn't go to a hospital or call a midwife. Instead, they relied on prayer and the support of their religious community. The birth appeared to go smoothly at first. The baby was born alive, breathing, seemingly healthy. The parents saw this as confirmation that their faith had been rewarded. But within hours, it became clear that something was wrong. The newborn was struggling, showing signs of distress that any medical professional would have recognized immediately. Instead of seeking emergency medical care, the parents and their community doubled down on prayer. They believed that this crisis was a test of their faith, that God was asking them to trust completely in His power to heal. They prayed over the baby, anointed the infant with oil, and called upon their God to perform a miracle. But the baby's condition continued to deteriorate. For several days, the newborn fought for life while the parents continued to pray. They watched their child struggle to breathe, saw the obvious signs of distress, but remained convinced that medical intervention would show a lack of faith. Members of their religious community supported this decision, encouraging the parents to trust in God's plan, reminding them that faith without doubt was the only way to receive divine healing. On the fourth day, the baby died. The parents, who had been so convinced that their faith would save their child, were left holding the lifeless body of their newborn. Their prayers had not been answered, their faith had not been rewarded, and their child was gone forever. But even in the face of this tragedy, some members of their community insisted that the parents simply hadn't had enough faith, that their doubt had prevented God from working a miracle. When authorities learned of the baby's death, they immediately began an investigation. Medical examiners determined that the infant had died from a completely treatable condition. If the parents had sought medical care during the pregnancy, the condition could have been detected and managed. If they had taken the baby to a hospital immediately after birth, the child's life could have been saved. The autopsy revealed that this newborn had suffered needlessly, dying from a condition that modern medicine could have easily addressed. The parents' faith, rather than saving their child, had killed him. Prosecutors filed charges against both parents, arguing that their refusal to seek medical care constituted criminal negligence. The case raised complex questions about religious freedom, parental rights, and the state's obligation to protect children. During the trial, the parents' attorneys argued that their clients had acted according to their sincere religious beliefs. They contended that the couple truly believed they were doing what was best for their child. But prosecutors countered that religious belief could not excuse the failure to provide necessary medical care to a helpless infant. They argued that the parents had a legal and moral obligation to seek help when their child was obviously in distress. The jury ultimately found both parents guilty of criminal negligence. The judge, while acknowledging the couple's sincere beliefs, emphasized that children have a right to medical care that supersedes their parents' religious convictions. The parents were sentenced to prison terms, their other children were placed in protective custody, and their religious community was left to grapple with the consequences of their extreme beliefs. This case highlights the dangerous intersection of religious extremism and child welfare. While freedom of religion is a fundamental right, that freedom cannot extend to denying life-saving medical care to children. The tragic irony is that the parents' faith, which they believed would protect their child, ultimately destroyed their family. Their refusal to seek medical care not only cost their baby's life but also resulted in the loss of their other children and their own freedom. This case serves as a reminder that love without action is meaningless, that faith without wisdom can be deadly, and that children cannot be sacrificed on the altar of adult beliefs. But religious extremism isn't the only dangerous belief system. Our next story takes us into the mind of a man whose twisted philosophy led to the most heinous crime imaginable. Story 5. There are crimes that shock us, crimes that disturb us, and then there are crimes that challenge our very understanding of human nature. What you're about to hear falls into that final category. This is the story of a man who didn't just kill his girlfriend. He consumed her, both literally and figuratively, in a way that defies comprehension. The man at the center of our story had been granted parole after serving time for previous violent offenses. The system had determined that he was ready to rejoin society, that he posed no further threat to the community. He began a relationship with a woman who saw past his criminal history, who believed in redemption and second chances. She opened her heart and her home to a man she thought was trying to rebuild his life. What she didn't know was that during his incarceration, he had developed a twisted philosophy about human relationships, about power, about the nature of love itself. He had convinced himself that true intimacy required complete consumption of another person. This wasn't just metaphorical language. He literally believed that to truly know someone, to fully possess them, he needed to consume their flesh. His girlfriend had no idea that the man she was sleeping next to had developed these horrific beliefs. She saw him as a partner, a companion, someone to build a future with. He saw her as prey. The details of what happened next are so disturbing that they challenge our ability to comprehend human evil. The man didn't kill his girlfriend in a moment of passion or during an argument. Instead, he planned her murder with cold, calculated precision. He saw it not as a crime, but as the ultimate expression of his love for her. He raped her first, asserting his dominance, taking what he believed was rightfully his. Then he killed her, watching the life drain from her eyes, feeling what he described as a sense of completion. But the murder was just the beginning. What happened next transcends normal criminal behavior and enters the realm of the truly incomprehensible. He dismembered her body, not just to dispose of evidence, but to prepare it for consumption. He cooked portions of her flesh and ate them, believing that this act would allow him to possess her completely. In his twisted mind, this wasn't a desecration of her body. It was the ultimate act of love. The woman's disappearance didn't go unnoticed. Friends and family members became concerned when she stopped answering her phone, when she failed to show up for work, when she seemingly vanished from her normal routines. Police began investigating her disappearance, and their attention quickly turned to her boyfriend. His criminal history made him an obvious suspect, but nothing could have prepared them for what they discovered. When officers searched his residence, they found evidence of the most horrific crime imaginable. Body parts were discovered in his refrigerator, cooked flesh was found in his kitchen, and the remnants of a human being were scattered throughout his home. The investigating officers, many of whom had decades of experience in law enforcement, were traumatized by what they found. Several required counseling to cope with the scene they had witnessed. The man showed no remorse, no shame, no recognition that what he had done was wrong. Instead, he calmly explained his philosophy, his belief that true love required complete consumption of the beloved. The trial became a media sensation, with reporters and curious onlookers desperate to understand how a human being could commit such acts. Psychologists and criminologists studied the case, trying to find explanations for behavior that seemed to defy rational analysis. The defendant's attorneys faced an impossible task. How do you defend someone who has committed acts so heinous that they challenge our basic understanding of humanity? They argued that their client was mentally ill, that his beliefs were the product of a diseased mind rather than evil intent. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about various psychological disorders, trying to find a medical explanation for his actions. But prosecutors countered that the defendant's behavior was too calculated, too deliberate to be the result of mental illness. They argued that he was simply evil, that some people choose to embrace darkness in ways that cannot be explained or excused. The jury, after hearing weeks of testimony, found the defendant guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This case has been studied by criminologists and psychologists around the world, all trying to understand what drives someone to commit such acts. Some experts believe it represents the ultimate expression of narcissistic personality disorder, where another person becomes nothing more than an object to be consumed. Others argue that it reflects a complete breakdown of empathy, an inability to see other people as human beings with rights and dignity. The defendant's own statement suggests that he viewed his girlfriend not as a person, but as property to be used and consumed. Perhaps most disturbing is the fact that this man had been considered safe for release by the parole system. He had convinced prison officials, psychiatrists, and parole boards that he was ready to rejoin society. This case raises uncomfortable questions about our ability to predict and prevent such crimes. How do we identify people capable of such evil? How do we protect potential victims from predators who have learned to hide their true nature? Following his conviction, the defendant's parole was officially revoked, though this was obviously a moot point given his life sentence. The case led to reviews of the parole system and questions about how such a dangerous individual had been released in the first place. The victim's family, who had welcomed this man into their lives, now struggles to understand how someone they trusted could have been capable of such horror. They're left with the knowledge that their loved one suffered unimaginably at the hands of someone she cared about. This case stands as perhaps the most extreme example of how evil can masquerade as love, how predators can use intimacy as a weapon, and how the people closest to us can sometimes be the most dangerous of all. But evil doesn't always announce itself so obviously. Sometimes it hides behind a youthful face and a promising future. Our next story takes us to Illinois, where a young man's bright prospects masked a deadly secret. Story 6. Success can be intoxicating. The praise, the admiration, the sense that you're destined for greatness. But what happens when that success isn't enough? When the pressure to maintain perfection becomes too much to bear. Our next story takes us into the world of academic achievement and athletic prowess, where a young man's golden reputation concealed a capacity for violence that would shock everyone who knew him. Emmett Metzger was everything parents dream their children will become. He was an honors student at his Illinois high school, a talented athlete who excelled in multiple sports, and a young man who seemed destined for success. Teachers praised his dedication, coaches admired his work ethic, and classmates looked up to him as a role model. Emmett was the kind of student who made his parents proud, who represented the best of his generation. But beneath this perfect exterior, Emmett was struggling. The pressure to maintain his image, to live up to everyone's expectations, was becoming overwhelming. He felt trapped by his own success, unable to show any weakness or vulnerability. When Emmett met Alexis Mackey, he saw someone who understood pressure, who knew what it meant to be expected to excel. Alexis was also a high achiever, someone who shared his drive for success and his fear of failure. Their relationship began as a meeting of minds, two ambitious young people who seemed perfectly matched. But as time went on, cracks began to appear in their perfect facade. Emmett and Alexis's relationship was intense from the beginning. They pushed each other to achieve more, to be better, to never settle for second best. On the surface, this seemed healthy, two driven individuals supporting each other's goals. But their relationship also became competitive. When Alexis succeeded in areas where Emmett struggled, he felt threatened. When she received recognition that he felt he deserved, resentment began to build. Friends noticed changes in Emmett's behavior. The easygoing young man they had known became more controlling, more possessive. He began to monitor Alexis's activities, questioning her interactions with other people, demanding to know where she was at all times. Alexis, who had always been independent and strong-willed, began to push back against Emmett's controlling behavior. She refused to be monitored, refused to give up her friendships, refused to make her world smaller to accommodate his insecurities. This resistance only intensified Emmett's need for control. In his mind, if he couldn't control Alexis, he was losing her. And losing her would mean losing the one person who truly understood the pressure he was under. The relationship that had once seemed so perfect was becoming toxic, built on manipulation and fear rather than love and respect. The end came suddenly, without warning signs that anyone outside their relationship could see. To their friends and families, Emmett and Alexis still appeared to be the golden couple, successful, attractive, destined for great things. But behind closed doors, their relationship had become a battleground. Every conversation was a power struggle, every disagreement became a war for control. On the day that would change everything, Emmett and Alexis had what appeared to be a normal argument. Friends who witnessed the beginning of their discussion said it seemed like typical relationship drama, the kind of disagreement that most couples work through. But for Emmett, this argument represented something much more significant. In his mind, Alexis was rejecting him, abandoning him, destroying the perfect image he had worked so hard to maintain. What happened next would transform Emmett from a promising young man into a killer. The details of Alexis Mackey's murder reveal the depth of Emmett's rage and the extent of his need for control. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated act of violence designed to ensure that if he couldn't have Alexis, no one else could either. Emmett attacked Alexis with a brutality that shocked investigators. The young woman who had once been his equal in every way was reduced to a victim of his uncontrollable anger. After killing Alexis, Emmett faced a choice. He could confess, accept responsibility for his actions, and face the consequences of his crime. Or he could try to maintain the perfect image that had become so important to him. He chose deception. Emmett disposed of Alexis's body and then began an elaborate charade designed to make it appear that she had simply disappeared. He contacted her friends and family, expressing concern about her whereabouts. He posted on social media, asking if anyone had seen her. For days, Emmett played the role of the worried boyfriend while knowing exactly what had happened to the woman he claimed to love. When Alexis was reported missing, police immediately began investigating her disappearance. As with many missing person cases, they focused their attention on the people closest to her. Emmett initially appeared to be a concerned boyfriend, eager to help with the investigation. He provided police with information about Alexis's habits, her friends, her possible whereabouts. But investigators noticed inconsistencies in Emmett's story. His timeline didn't match with other evidence, his emotional responses seemed rehearsed, and he appeared to know more about Alexis's disappearance than he was admitting. As the investigation intensified, Emmett's perfect facade began to crumble. The pressure that he had been running from his entire life finally caught up with him. When confronted with evidence of his involvement in Alexis's disappearance, Emmett's carefully constructed image collapsed completely. The golden boy, the perfect student, the promising young man became just another killer trying to avoid responsibility for his actions. Emmett Metzger's arrest sent shockwaves through his community. Teachers who had praised his character, coaches who had seen him as a leader, classmates who had admired his success. All were forced to confront the reality that they had never really known him at all. Alexis Mackey's family, who had welcomed Emmett into their lives, now faced the devastating reality that the young man they had trusted with their daughter's heart had taken her life. This case serves as a reminder that success and achievement don't guarantee good character, that the pressure to be perfect can create monsters, and that the people who seem to have everything can sometimes be the most dangerous of all. But evil doesn't discriminate by age. Our final story takes us to Oklahoma, where a family gathering became the scene of an unthinkable tragedy. Story 7. Family is supposed to be our safe harbor, the place where we can always find love and protection. Grandparents are meant to be sources of wisdom and comfort, the people who spoil us with cookies and unconditional love. But what happens when the very people who should protect us become the ones we need protection from? Heidi Dutton was known in her Oklahoma community as a devoted grandmother, someone who cherished time with her family and took pride in maintaining close relationships with her children and grandchildren. Her home was often filled with the sounds of family gatherings, children playing, adults catching up on each other's lives, the kind of warmth that makes a house feel like a home. Heidi's granddaughter was a regular visitor, someone who felt safe and loved in her grandmother's house. The little girl looked forward to spending time with Heidi, never imagining that her grandmother's home would become the site of her worst nightmare. But beneath the surface of this seemingly normal family, tensions had been building. Financial problems, family disputes, and personal struggles were creating pressure that would eventually explode in the most devastating way possible. The growing tension, 105:30-108:30. According to court documents and witness testimony, Heidi Dutton had been dealing with significant personal and financial stress in the months leading up to the tragedy. Bills were mounting, relationships were strained, and the weight of her problems seemed to be crushing her spirit. Family members noticed changes in Heidi's behavior. The woman who had once been the heart of family gatherings became withdrawn, irritable, and unpredictable. Her granddaughter, innocent and trusting, didn't understand why. Grandma seemed so different. Mental health professionals who later examined the case suggested that Heidi may have been suffering from severe depression and anxiety, conditions that can distort thinking and lead to catastrophic decision-making. But mental illness doesn't excuse what happened next. It doesn't justify the betrayal of trust that would destroy a family and end an innocent life. On the day that would change everything, Heidi's granddaughter came to visit, expecting another normal day with her grandmother. Perhaps they would bake cookies together, watch television, or work on a puzzle, the kinds of activities that create cherished childhood memories. Instead, the little girl walked into a situation that would end her life. The details of what happened are difficult to comprehend. Heidi Dutton, the woman who should have been this child's protector, became her killer. The grandmother who had once kissed scraped knees and dried tears became the person who ended her granddaughter's life. According to police reports, the murder was not a sudden act of violence but a deliberate decision. Heidi planned her granddaughter's death, carrying it out with a coldness that defied the bonds of family and the instincts of love. The little girl, who trusted her grandmother completely, never saw the attack coming. She died in a place where she should have been safest, at the hands of someone who should have loved her unconditionally. When the child's parents discovered what had happened, their world collapsed completely. Not only had they lost their daughter, but they had lost her to the very person they had trusted to keep her safe. The investigation into the child's death revealed the extent of Heidi's planning. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of temporary insanity. Evidence showed that she had thought about this act, prepared for it, and carried it out with deliberate intent. Police found evidence in Heidi's home that painted a picture of a woman who had been consumed by her problems, who had begun to see violence as a solution to her difficulties. But perhaps most disturbing was the realization that this crime could have been prevented. There had been warning signs, changes in Heidi's behavior that might have alerted family members to seek help. The tragedy wasn't just the loss of an innocent child, it was the recognition that the family had failed to see the danger hiding in plain sight. Heidi Dutton was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The case that followed was one of the most difficult the local community had ever faced. How do you prosecute a grandmother for killing her own granddaughter? During the trial, defense attorneys argued that Heidi was mentally ill, that her actions were the result of severe psychological problems rather than evil intent. They brought in expert witnesses who testified about depression, anxiety, and the ways that mental illness can lead to violent behavior. But prosecutors countered that mental illness could not excuse the premeditated murder of an innocent child. They argued that regardless of her psychological state, Heidi had made a choice to end her granddaughter's life. The jury, faced with overwhelming evidence of Heidi's guilt, found her guilty of murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison, ensuring that she would never again have the opportunity to harm another family member. The Dutton family's tragedy serves as a stark reminder that evil can emerge from the most unexpected places. It shows us that mental illness, while not an excuse for violence, can be a contributing factor that families must take seriously. The little girl who died in her grandmother's house will never grow up, never experience the joys and challenges of life, never have the chance to make her own mark on the world. This case challenges our assumptions about family, about safety, about the people we trust with our children's lives. It reminds us that vigilance must extend even to those closest to us, that love without wisdom can be dangerous. Most heartbreakingly, it shows us that sometimes the very people who should protect our children become the ones our children need protection from. 7 stories. 7 families were destroyed. 7 reminders that evil doesn't announce itself with horns and a pitchfork, it often wears the face of someone we know, someone we trust, someone we love. Tonight, we've journeyed through the darkest corners of human nature. We've seen mothers who kill their children, lovers who become predators, caregivers who betray their trust, and family members who destroy the very bonds that should be sacred. Each of these cases teaches us something different about the nature of evil, about the fragility of the social contracts that hold our society together, about the importance of vigilance in protecting the innocent. But perhaps most importantly, these stories remind us of the preciousness of life, the value of trust, and the devastating consequences when both are destroyed. As you drift off to sleep tonight, listening to the gentle rhythm of the rain, remember that most people are good, that most families are safe havens, that most strangers wish you no harm. But remember too that darkness exists, that evil walks among us, and that eternal vigilance is the price of safety. What do you think drives people to commit such heinous acts? Is it mental illness, evil intent, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below, like, share and subscribe so you won't miss out on our next case. If these stories have affected you, remember that there are resources available for those who need help. Mental health support, domestic violence services, and child protection agencies exist to prevent tragedies like these. Thank you for joining me on this dark journey. Sleep well, stay safe, and remember, tomorrow's dawn always comes, no matter how dark the night.